It was raining the morning the letter came. Soft rain, the kind that makes the rosemary lean toward the kitchen window and turns the street to silver. The kettle hummed. I held my blue mug with both hands and watched steam rise like a small, kind cloud. The house smelled like toast and lemon soap. Quiet, steady, familiar. My baby slept in her bassinet near the table, one hand open like she was holding a secret. The envelope on the mat had the bank's name in the corner. I thought it was another polite notice. I opened it at the sink, my ring dish next to me holding the spare key and a folded note that says, "Breathe." The words were simple and wrong at the same time. Trust distribution, complete. Beneficiary, Nancy Hart. My aunt, the executor. The one who told me after Grandma died, "Don't worry about the paperwork. I'll handle it. Your baby will be taken care of." My Aunt Nancy had always said the trust was for the first grandchild born after 90. That was my daughter, Grace, by 2 weeks. When I asked last month how to set up the account, Nancy smiled too big and said, "There is a delay. The bank needs a form." She waved her hand like she was shooing a fly. You know how banks are. I set the letter on the table and felt the floor tilt and then steady under my feet. The kettle clicked off. The bassinet creaked softly as my girl stretched, her fingers opening and closing like small stars. I picked up my phone. The message I sent Nancy was only 3 words, tea at noon. I put the phone in the bowl by the fruit and opened the window a finger's width. New air moved through the room. At 11, the door closed with a soft click. A man stood on my porch in a raincoat with a file in his hands and a kind, careful face. He introduced himself as Daniel from the clinic lab. "I'm sorry to trouble you," he said. "You asked for a printed copy." He handed me 2 envelopes. DNA results I had ordered 3 weeks ago at the urging of a cousin who loves family trees. I had said at the time, "For the family archive," laughing. He smiled now like he understood more than I said. "If you have questions, call." I put the envelopes next to the bank letter and the old cream-colored copy of Grandma's will that lives in my binder under House. The rosemary brushed the glass. The clock above the stove made itself known. I picked up Grace and rested her warm cheek against my shoulder. "Will be gentle. Will be exact." At noon, my aunt came in with damp hair and a sweater too bright for the sky. She kissed the air next to my face and looked past me toward the table. "You look tired," she said, as if that were the topic. I set the blue mug and a second cup down. Steam rose and softened the air between us. I slid the bank letter on top of the envelopes. "We need to talk," I said. Nancy's eyes flicked to the paper, then to the window, then back to me. She smiled the way people smile when they are about to tell a story with holes in it. I did not shout. I did not accuse. I poured tea. I waited for her hands to stop fussing with her napkin. When she reached for the bank letter, I placed my palm lightly on the DNA envelopes. "After this, after we make room for the truth." She laughed, thin and sharp. "What truth?" she asked. I looked at my daughter and then at the names on the papers. The truth in those envelopes would turn our family picture frame on its side and show who had been standing outside of it all along. It would show who the real thief was, not with a scene, with a simple line on a page and a quiet woman in her kitchen holding her baby and a blue mug.
I grew up in a house where mornings looked like this. Tea on the stove. The kitchen window fogged for a minute and then cleared. The rosemary by the sink leaning toward the light like a small, brave animal. The door closing with that soft, polite click even when the radio was low. We were not fancy. We were steady. My grandmother, Ruth, was a woman who could make $1 into 2 bowls of soup and still have change for a lemon. She worked at the bakery until her hands ached, then knitted in the evenings while the television murmured. She kept her important papers in a cream-colored envelope in a shoebox, and a small note on top that said, "If I forget, call Nancy." She laughed when she wrote it. "I won't forget," she said, "but I like a backup singer." She had a way of making worry sound like a friend. Nancy is my aunt, my mother's sister. She is brisk, quick with the pen, and always the one who says, "Let me handle it." She likes forms, counters, offices that smell like toner and air conditioning. When Grandma died last winter, she stood in front of the casserole table and said, "I'll be the executor," like she was offering to carry a heavy box. Everyone nodded. It made sense. She knows the bank manager. She knows how to get a clerk to print just one more copy. The trust was not grand. Grandma called it my little nest. When she turned 85, she had started to put money aside from her Social Security and bakery savings, just in case, she said, for the first grandbaby born after my 90. A small start, a crib and a cushion. She loved rules that felt like a blessing. She told us over tea with a hand on my mother's arm and a wink at me. My mother died before she could see my baby. It still surprises me to write that sentence. She was the one who kept the world in a neat ring dish. Keys, safety pin, tiny folded paper that said, "Breathe." She would have loved Grace's stubborn little chin. She would have stood in my kitchen and made tea I didn't know I needed. In the absence of my mother, I looked to Nancy, because that is what daughters do when the older women in the family tell them who to call if they forget. When I told Nancy I was pregnant, she clapped and then went quiet and did the math on her fingers. 2 weeks after 90, she said. "Oh, honey." She hugged me and smelled like that perfume she wears that tries hard to be a flower. "Don't you worry," she said. "We'll handle the trust." She said we, but she meant I. Grace came on a rainy morning, stubborn and perfect, her hand opening and closing like she had a secret. I brought her to see Grandma 2 days later at the nursing home. Grandma held her for a minute, then patted the blanket, tired but smiling. "First grandbaby after 90, she whispered. "Make sure the bank knows." She died 2 weeks after that, quiet as a kettle clicking off. After the funeral, Nancy gathered us in the living room. "There's a process," she said, quick and calm. "I'll file. I'll meet with the bank. It's small, but it's real. We'll make a little account for Grace." When I asked a month later how it was going, she smiled, too big. "You know banks. Forms on forms." When I asked again, she laughed. "You are a new mother. Go nap. Let me fuss at the teller." Nancy likes to be useful. She also likes to be important. The line between the two is thin in our family. She was the first one to learn how to drive, the first one to get a credit card, the one who handled the storage unit when Grandpa died and nobody wanted to go through the boxes. "I'll take care of it," she said then, and she did. She also took home 2 quilts and a silver spoon that my mother had wanted and never mentioned it again. We have a cousin who loves family trees. Leo is the one who brings a stack of photocopies to Thanksgiving and says, "Do you know our great-great came from County Clare?" He asked us to spit in a tube at Christmas 2 years ago because he wanted to connect with second cousins who might have photos of people nobody could remember. "For the archive," he said, and I rolled my eyes and did it anyway because I love him. My results came. I glanced, smiled at the map with dots, and tucked the login away. Nancy rolled her eyes and said, "Those things are cute." She did not send hers in that day. "Maybe later," she said. later showed up this spring with a kit Leo left on her porch. She texted a photo of the box sitting by a green fern. "Fine," she wrote, "for the tree." Before the baby, my life fit in quiet drawers that closed easily. I had a job at the clinic library 3 days a week, filing journals and showing tired people where to find good words. I had a small garden with rosemary and one tomato plant that always seemed surprised to fruit. My husband, Josh, works early mornings and likes to fix a leaky faucet without calling anyone. We keep our shoes by the door and our phones in a bowl by the fruit, and we write "on time" next to the mortgage in my binder because paper makes me feel safe. Grandma's will sits behind the House tab. The copy is cream-colored, her signature neat at the bottom. The trust line is simple. For the first grandchild born after my 90th birthday, to be used for that grandchild's benefit. And then an amount that looks large to me and small to people on televisions. It was her way of tucking a blanket around a child she would not get to walk to school. Nancy is named as executor. The words "trustee's discretion" are in there like a hinge. I noticed them and did not know then how much oil they might need.
After Grace was born, envelopes started appearing with Grandma's handwriting on the return address. She had written them last summer, dated for this spring. Cards with lines like, "If you're reading this, kiss the baby for me," and "Remember to check the stove twice when you're tired," and one that said, "Don't let Nancy scare the bank." I laughed when I read that one and put it in the ring dish because it felt like a small hand on my back. I did not think I would need it. Nancy and I have always had different ways in the same house. When it rains, I make tea, she makes a list. When the door sticks, I rub wax, she calls a locksmith. When a child cries, I hold, she distracts. Both work, both have their time. She says I am sentimental, I say she is efficient. We both are right. In April, at the grocery, Mr. Lopez asked after Grandma in the aisle with the bread. "She made the best lemon cake," he said. "She left something for the baby, didn't she?" I nodded. "She did," I said. "Nancy is handling it." He clicked his tongue in a kind way. "She always does," he said. He's known us since we were small. 2 weeks before the bank letter, Leo's name lit up my phone. "Check your email," he said, breathless. I sent the tree link. I found something odd, but I don't want to say it over the phone and be wrong. It might be a typo. I opened the email later that night when the house had gone quiet and the tea had made a friend with my nerves. The site showed matches and percentages and names I knew. My grandmother's sister's line was strong in me. My mother's cousin matched as expected. Nancy's profile, which she must have finally activated, sat there with a funny note. Very low shared DNA, possible relation, distant. I blinked. I closed my laptop. I thought, the site is silly. I decided to ask for a printed copy because paper feels different than screens. For the archive, I told the lab tech at the clinic the next day, and he smiled and said he would send it. I did not call Nancy. I wanted to hold the thing in my hands before I turned it into a sentence. The bank letter arrived this morning with its plain words. Trust distribution, complete. Beneficiary, Nancy Hart. I held the paper and felt something old click. The DNA envelopes slid onto my table at 11 with a soft thud, like a light thing with a heavy truth. I put them on the cream-colored will and looked at my daughter sleeping with her fist curled like a tiny, stubborn comma. I made tea because that is how I start every hard thing. I opened the window a finger's width because fresh air makes rooms more honest. I texted Nancy, tea at noon, because sometimes the only way to keep your voice steady is to set a cup in front of you and wrap your hands around it. Nancy arrived with damp hair and a sweater too bright for the day, the way she always dresses when she wants to change the weather by pretending it does not exist. She kissed the air next to my face and looked toward the table. "You look tired," she said, like that was the headline. She lifted Grace out of her bassinet without asking and said, "My girl," like the world had not rearranged itself in the last month. Grace sighed and went back to sleep because she knows what she needs better than any of us. We sat. I poured. Steam rose and softened the space between us. I slid the bank letter across the wood. Nancy's face is good at meetings. It does not tell you what she is thinking until she thinks it will win her something. She glanced, then lifted her eyes. "Yes," she said. "I handled it." "For who?" I asked, quiet. "For the trust," she said. "For the family." She tucked hair behind her ear. "I have expenses, executor work. I've been driving back and forth to the bank. I was going to tell you once it's settled. It's safer this way." "For the baby," I said. Grandma wrote Grace's name with her chin up. "She has tax issues you don't understand," she said. "We will move it when the time is right. You should rest." She has always talked to me like that at the end of sentences she wants to own. "You should rest. You should let me handle it. You should not worry." It worked when my mother was alive because my mother would step in and laugh and say, "Let your sister be a rooster. You be the rooster's weather." It worked when I didn't have a baby and had the luxury of thinking worry was a hobby. It did not work with the letter on the table and the envelopes under my palm and the rosemary brushing the glass like a metronome. I laid my hand lightly on the DNA envelopes. I asked for a printed copy, for the tree. I said tree the way Leo says it, like an old friend who tells you the truth when your aunt wants you to take a nap. Nancy smiled in the way she smiles when she is about to say a sentence with holes in it. Those things are cute. They make mistakes.
"I like paper," I said. "It makes people honest." She laughed, thin and sharp. "What truth?" she asked, eyes on the window. I looked at my daughter and then at the names on the papers and thought of Grandma's hand on my mother's arm and the way she had written, "Don't let Nancy scare the bank," on the card that sits in my ring dish. The truth in those envelopes would not change how much soup Grandma had cooked or how many drives to the bank Nancy had made or the way rain makes the rosemary lean. It would change who had the right to use words like family and for the baby in a meeting voice at my table. Before today, I would have believed gravity over paper. After this morning, I learned that paper can stand up on a table like a quiet witness and say, "Sit down." That is what the bank letter did. That is what the DNA envelope would do. Not with a scene, with calm, with a woman holding a baby and a blue mug and a life that has been made of lists and tea and small, steady moves. Josh stood in the doorway at 12:05 and nodded at Nancy with that polite half salute he uses when he is trying to be both a nephew and a man whose house is his. He kissed Grace's head. He put his phone in the bowl without being asked. "Tea?" he mouthed. I nodded. He poured a third cup and sat in the chair by the window so I could see his hands and breathe. I pressed my palm on the DNA envelope and felt the edge through the paper. "After this," I told Nancy, "after we make room for the truth." She laughed, thin and sharp. "What truth?" she asked, eyes on the window. I looked at my daughter and then at the names on the papers and thought of Grandma's hand on my mother's arm and the way she had written, "Don't let Nancy scare the bank," on the card that sits in my ring dish. The truth in those envelopes would not change how much soup Grandma had cooked, or how many drives to the bank Nancy had made, or the way rain makes the rosemary lean. It would change who had the right to use words like family and for the baby in a meeting voice at my table. Before today, I would have believed gravity over paper. After this morning, I learned that paper can stand up on a table like a quiet witness and say, "Sit down." That is what the bank letter did. That is what the DNA envelope would do. Not with a scene, with calm, with a woman holding a baby and a blue mug and a life that has been made of lists and tea and small, steady moves. Josh stood in the doorway at 12:05 and nodded at Nancy with that polite half salute he uses when he is trying to be both a nephew and a man whose house is his. He kissed Grace's head. He put his phone in the bowl without being asked. "Tea?" he mouthed. I nodded. He poured a third cup and sat in the chair by the window so I could see his hands and breathe. I pressed my palm on the DNA envelope and felt the edge through the paper. After this, I told Nancy, after we make room for the truth. She laughed, thin and a little high. "It's cute that you think paper matters more than family," she said. Her voice was sugar and tin. I looked at Grace. I looked at the letter with beneficiary Nancy Hart. I looked at the cream-colored will and the line that said, "For the first grandchild after 90. Family is why we are doing this here, at my table, with tea. I slid the envelope edge under my thumb and got ready to open something that would turn a frame on its side and let a picture fall out that had been hanging crooked for a very long time. We sat with tea. Steam softened the air and made the room feel like it could hold something difficult. I slid the cream-colored will out of my binder and laid it on the table beside the bank letter. The ink looked tired and sure. I said, "Read it, gently, out loud." Nancy glanced at the page and then at me. "I know what it says." "Read it," I repeated. My voice stayed soft, my hands stayed flat. She sighed like a woman waiting in a line she thought she could skip and read the sentence in that clear, meeting voice she uses for forms. "For the first great-grandchild born after my 90th birthday, to be used for that great-grandchild's benefit." She paused. "Great-grandchild," she repeated, as if saying it twice could make it smaller. "I told you Grandma always meant grandbaby. She does call all babies grandbabies." I tapped the line with my finger, but the lawyer wrote great-grandchild. He did it on purpose. She set the page down and slid her cup in small circles. We all knew it was about the first baby. My son's little girl came first, 2 weeks before Grace. I had to move fast. "For the baby's benefit," I said. "Yes," she said. She nodded too hard. "For the baby." I slid the bank letter back across the wood. This says beneficiary Nancy Hart. Not a baby's name, not a guardian account. It went to you. She smiled in the way people smile when they want a room to forget its own rules. Executor's discretion, expenses, taxes. I'll set up the baby's account. It's safer if I hold it for now. The bank prefers one name. We've always done it this way in this family. Josh leaned forward a little. "Have we?" he asked, quietly. Nancy waved his voice away. "You're new to this," she said, sweetly. I touched the DNA envelopes. "We're going to open these, because there is one more piece of paper that belongs on this table." She laughed, thin and a little high. "Those kits are cute. They make mistakes. They're for people who think maps with dots are facts. I like paper, I said. It helps me breathe when a room wants to forget what it's for. I opened the first envelope, the one with my name, and slid the printed page out. The lab had put the family matches in a simple list with plain percentages and a little key in the corner like a recipe card. My mother's cousin, 20%. Grandma's sister's line, small but tidy, dots. I set it down. I opened the second envelope, the one Leo had asked the clinic to print for Nancy when he sent the kit to her porch. The heading said, Heart, Nancy, and the matches were there. Low, distant, friendly, like a neighbor waving from 3 streets over. Next to my name, the words were plain. Very low shared DNA, not consistent with aunt-niece. I slid the page to Nancy. Explain, I said. Her face did something I have only seen twice. The day my mother died, and she got lost in my kitchen. The day the bank refused to cash a check she wanted to cash on a Saturday because she knew the manager. Her mouth opened and closed around a small, sharp breath. Those are wrong, she said. Leo's matches say the same. He didn't bring them because he didn't know how to say it. He asked me to print it. I did. She looked at Josh as if his hands could pull a better story out of the air. He looked at her, even, calm, the way he looks at a faucet before he decides which wrench to pick up. Nancy, he said, what does it mean? She looked at Grace in my arms and then away. Mom took me in, she said suddenly, the words kicking out of her mouth like a stool. Her sister couldn't manage. It was the 70s. Nobody did paper. They told me when I was 12 and then told me to stop asking. I am her daughter, she added in a rush, in every way that matters. In every way that matters, I repeated, and nodded because love matters. It always does. And this, I touched the will, is about a line the lawyer wrote down on purpose. Great-grandchild of Ruth, legally, blood or adoption, papers. I slid the bank letter under her hand. And this went to you. She stared at the page. Her fingers went still. I am family.
You are, I said. You always will be. You are my aunt. You are not Grandma Ruth's legal child. The trust is not for your son's daughter. It is not for your expenses. It is not for later in your account. It is for Grace. You think she meant to cut me out? Her voice rose, small and sharp. I think she meant for a baby to have crib money and a cushion, I said. She wrote it down so nobody would have to guess. Nancy sat back and then leaned forward again, like a person in a boat that is turned and is deciding whether to fight the current or let it carry her to a bank she didn't choose. You have no idea how many times I went to that bank, she said. How many forms, how many sighs from tellers. I am tired of being the one who handles everything while you make tea. I'm tired of making tea while you tell me not to worry, I said. And something old settled on the table between us, like a napkin finally in the right place. Josh cleared his throat. Nancy, he said, can you tell us exactly what you did, step by step? She looked at him and then at me, and her shoulders dropped a degree. I met with the trust officer. I said there were tax questions. I opened a trustee account in my name to move things faster. I used my discretion to distribute because the first baby came. She lifted her chin. I'll give it to her, she added quickly, as if that would make the room stand up and clap. To my son's baby, I'll put it in her name. And the line about for the first great-grandchild of Ruth, I asked. She stared at the window. The Rosemary brushed the glass. "We're all her," she said, and it came out tired. "We all ate her soup." "We did," I said gently, "and we will again, and we will do this right." I slid the bank letter back into the binder. "We are calling the trust officer now. We are asking for a freeze. We are asking for a meeting. We are asking for a full accounting. We are bringing this," I touched the DNA page, "and Leo, and the cream-colored will with the line that matters." Nancy reached for her phone and then remembered it was in the bowl by the fruit. She made a small motion with her hand. "We can fix it," she said. "We will," I said. "Together. At the bank, not at my table." She straightened a little, like a woman who knows how to walk into a building and say the right words, and then sat back down like a niece in her sister's kitchen. "You'll tell everyone," she said, deflated. "I will tell whoever needs to be told, so this doesn't become a gossip story. I will tell the truth, small and plain. I will not spare you where you use the word discretion. I will not make you into a villain. I will not make grandma into a judge. I wanted to be the one who takes care of things," she said. "I wanted them to say, 'Thank you, Nancy.'"
I looked at her, sister to my mother, backup singer on the note Grandma left in her shoebox. "Then be the one who takes care of this," I said. "Come with me tomorrow. Tell the trust officer you moved the money. Tell him to put it back. Bring a pen. Sign." She looked at Grace and then at me. "You'll still let me hold her?" "Later," I said, "when the account is in her name. When you stop calling my tea small." She laughed, weakly. "Your tea saved us," she said, and then clamped her mouth shut, like she wished she could take the compliment back. "Oh, don't write that down." "I don't need to," I said. "I will remember." After she left, Josh and I sat at the table with the binder open and the DNA pages tucked behind the cream-colored will. He put his hand over mine. "You were steady," he said. "I didn't shout," I said. "You didn't need to," he said. At 4, if life had been a show about drama, somebody would have knocked and yelled. Instead, the house settled. I made soup because soup is my way of marking a day that turned a corner. I wrote, "Bank, 10 a.m." on a sticky note and put it on the pantry. I fed the baby. I put the DNA pages back in their envelope and slid the whole stack into the binder under house. I texted Leo. I texted my father's cousin who knows a probate attorney. I texted Nadia tomorrow, and she replied, "I'll sit in the lobby." That night, I slept in pieces. When a sentence tried to wake me, beneficiary Nancy Hart, I whispered back, "Hold, freeze, meeting," and the sentence sat down at the foot of the bed like a dog trained to stay. In the morning, the rain had stopped. The Rosemary looked washed and brave. We put on clean clothes. We went to the bank. The bank smelled like paper and a little lemon, the way places with counters and pens on chains always do. The trust officer met us in the lobby with a gentle face and a folder in his hand. "Mr. Green," he said, "and I'm sorry for the circumstances." He led us to a small room with a glass wall and a table that looked like it had seen other hard conversations. Leo was already there, a stack of papers tucked under his arm, his family tree in a neat binder like a school project he hadn't meant to carry into court. We sat. Nancy stood a moment longer, as if she didn't know whether to be the executor in the room or the niece. Then she sat too. Mr. Green placed his folder on the table and folded his hands. "We can do this in simple steps," he said. "We'll look at the document, we'll look at the account history, We'll make a plan. I slid the cream-colored copy of the will across the table. He read the line with his quiet voice, the way a person reads a recipe out loud when it matters. For the first great-grandchild born after my 90th birthday to be used for that great-grandchild's benefit. He looked up at us. "Do we agree this is the controlling language?" he asked. Nancy nodded, jaw set. "Yes," she said, quick. "But there are executor expenses and taxes, and the baby came first in my son's line." "Executor expenses are one thing," he said, calm. "Distribution to a beneficiary is another. The beneficiary is the first great-grandchild of Ruth. If we need to name that child now, we can. We'll need proof." He looked at me. His eyes were steady. That would be Grace. I opened the DNA envelope and slid the simple page to the middle. "I brought this because my cousin asked me to," I said. "There's also no adoption paper for Nancy. She is my aunt. She is not Grandma Ruth's legal child. She told us this morning. She was taken in. There are no papers." Mr. Green glanced at the page and nodded. Adoption papers would make a difference in a legal line. Without them, they do not. He turned to Leo. "Do you have the family group sheet?" Leo slid it forward with hands that had been waiting to be useful in a way that didn't make Thanksgiving crowded. Names, birth dates, a tidy tree. "Thank you," Mr. Green said. And I wanted to cry at the way he said thank you to my cousin. He opened his folder and pulled out a ledger with neat lines and small numbers. "This is the trust activity since date of death," he said. He slid it to the middle where we could all see. There were transfers, dates, notes. Trustee transferred to Hart, Nancy, $22,000. Executor expense, $1,200. Mileage, copies. Trustee transfer, $8,000. Distribution. Auto center, $1,350. Check, $1049. My stomach tightened and then settled. Numbers are terrible favors like that. They hurt and steady you at the same time. Nancy's chin went up. "She kept receipts," she said, "mostly." Her voice wore the word like a thin coat. "I borrowed..." She stopped. The room held its breath for her in a way I didn't hate. Mr. Green nodded. "I understand the desire to move quickly, but trustee discretion is not authority to change a beneficiary. He chose his words like nails he knew would hold. You had a fiduciary duty to hold for the named beneficiary. If the wrong person received funds, we can reverse transfers within our bank. If funds left to an external account, we'll request return. If not returned, we'll refer to counsel. We can also change trustees." He looked at me. His eyes were steady. "I can appoint a co-trustee or a new trustee today if the executor consents or the bank determines removal is in the best interest of the beneficiary." He looked at Nancy. "Do you consent to return and to resign as trustee?" Her face hardened and then softened like wet cement. She looked at me, then at the will, then at the ledger like a person finally reading the book they kept on a shelf for years. "I will return what I took." She straightened. "I will resign." Mr. Green slid across two forms. "This is a reversal authorization," he said. "This is a resignation. And this," he pulled out a third page, "appoints a new trustee. You can name the trust department or a person. I recommend a co-trustee, the trust department, and a family member, so we can handle mechanics and the family can carry the spirit." Leo lifted his pen halfway, as if his hand had its own opinion. I smiled at him. "Name me as co-trustee with the bank," I said. I didn't look at Nancy when I said this, not to exclude, to hold. I will never be the rooster. I am the rooster's weather. I can keep the air clean. Mr. Green nodded. We'll set up a custodial account for Grace, a 529 for later, and a UTMA for now. Funds can move once reversal's clear. We'll note benefit of minor, no withdrawals without 2 signatures. He looked at Nancy. Executor expenses that are legitimate can be reimbursed with receipts. You will bring them to this office within 30 days. A woman in a blue cardigan appeared with a notary stamp that looked like a small moon ready to bless something. "I'll witness," she said, soft. 2 signatures, the stamp thumped. It made that same good, sure sound I have come to love in offices where people are trying their best to hold families together without pretending paper never tears.
Nancy's hand shook a little as she signed the resignation. Not enough to be drama, enough to be true. When she finished, she placed the pen down carefully, the way people put spoons back on saucers when they're done pretending they want more cake. "I didn't want to steal," she said, not looking at anyone, and then, because the room was one where truth had been invited, "I wanted to be the one who carries a box." "Be the one who carries this," I said softly. "Bring the receipts, sign the papers, answer Leo's text when he asked for Grandma's middle name for the file. Sit with me when we tell Grandpa's sister. Keep the baby on your lap when we make soup. That is a box." Mr. Green photocopied the will, the DNA page, the family group sheet. He handed me a green folder with a little card on the front. Custodial, Grace Hart, or last name. My name and the bank trust officers were printed under trustees. It looked like the flimsiest thing and the strongest thing at once. I held it and felt my shoulders lower in a way they hadn't since the letter hit my table. He turned to Nancy. "We'll process internal reversals today. A compliance officer will contact you. Any funds in external accounts need to be wired back by Friday. If you need to sell something to do that decently, do that." She nodded. She took out her phone only when Mr. Green nodded at the bowl he keeps on his desk, the bank's version of my fruit bowl for phones. She typed with stiff fingers. "I'll call the credit union," she said. "I'll tell them." Lidl leaned in. "I'll help you gather," he said gently. "Bring me the box. We'll go through it. We'll argue about where to put things, and then we'll put them where the bank likes them. We can do that." He is good that way. He can make a list sound like a casserole. Nancy laughed through her nose and then brushed at her face like something had landed there and she didn't want the room to see it. "Fine," she said. "You get to be useful." We left with the green folder and a paper that said freeze and another that said resigned. We walked out into air that smelt like rain had done the day a favor. In the parking lot, Nancy stood with her hand on the roof of her car and looked at me like a niece again. "Do I get to hold her?" "After," I said. "When the money sits where Grandma asked it to sit. When the account has her name on it and not yours. When you stop saying, 'You're tired' at the end of my sentences." "I said that," she whispered. "I did." She nodded at herself like a person who heard something she doesn't want to forget. "After," she repeated. "I will wait." Leo hugged me in that way cousins do, half laugh, half shake, then call me in a low voice. "Dinner at ours on Saturday. Bring soup. We'll bring bread. Aunt May will bring a story we've heard." He grinned. "We'll need that." At home, the door made the crisp, kind sound I have started to listen for like a blessing. The rosemary brushed the glass. The kettle hummed. I put the green folder on the table. I put the bank letter under it. I put the cream-colored will on top for a second because I like the way older paper looks like it knows how to sit on top of a stack. I wrote bank, 3 p.m., reversal pending in my binder, like I have written on time next to a mortgage for years. It calmed me the same way it did. Josh kissed Grace's head and looked at the green folder with the wary respect good men keep for forms. "We okay?" he asked. "We will be. We did the thing. She signed. The bank froze. The new account has her name on it." I lifted the folder and frowned at the typo that wasn't there. There it was, Grace's name, printed neat, not baby, not later. My child's life, ready to be held by a piece of paper that says who loves her when the person who loved me wrote it down and then left. At 4, my phone rang. Mr. Green. "Internal reversals complete," he said. "We have funds back in the trust. External wire requested. We appointed the bank and you as trustees. I am sending you a link for the 529. We will keep a note in the file. DNA reviewed. No legal adoption for Nancy. Beneficiary confirmed. Grace." "Thank you," I said. The way you say it to the person who held the flashlight while you looked for the thing you dropped under your sink in the middle of the night. He laughed softly. "It is my job. And it is the kind of day that makes my job feel like something more than paper." Nancy texted at 5. Wire sent. Then, after a long minute, "I'm sorry." And then nothing else. It was enough. I did not reply. Not yet.
We told Grandpa's sister on Sunday after church in the kitchen of the old house with the window that sticks. She wiped her hands on her apron and said, "Thank you for doing this in the light." She took my hands, then Nancy's, and said, "Ruth would be proud of the part where you stopped the bank with your mouth and not a bat." That sounded like her. We ate soup, and she told us the story of the time Grandma Ruth took in a neighbor's child for a year and never wrote it down because she thought hearts were paper enough. "Different time," Aunt Etta said. "Different rules. We write things now. We still make soup." Nancy sat and listened and didn't interrupt. At the end, she asked if she could hold Grace. Aunt Etta looked at me. I looked at Nancy's hands, empty, quiet. "After," I said again. And while the word rested on the room, my phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Green. "External wire received. Custodial funded." I showed Nancy the screen because sometimes a small green check mark is the thing that tells you a door has really closed. "Now," I said. I handed her my daughter. She held her like a person who has remembered how to hold a thing without trying to keep it. Back home, I put the green folder in my binder under house and wrote Grace, Custodio, in my careful letters. I set a fresh sticky note on the pantry. Bank, done. Trustees, set. After. I made tea. I opened the window a finger's width. The rosemary leaned in. The door clicked. The house breathed. I did not throw the DNA page away. I did not wave it around. I tucked it behind the cream-colored will because it matters even when it hurts. It changes nothing about who fed me soup as a girl. It changes a line on a form. It keeps someone from using the word family to hide in a bank. It belongs in the story, but not at the end of it. That night, when my mind tried to rehearse the meeting again like a scene, I told it there had been no scene. There had been paper and a stamp and a pen and a woman who used to tell me rest at the end of her sentences, learning to say after. There had been a baby sleeping through a door that makes a good sound. There had been rosemary and rain. There had been soup. I held my child and said out loud the sentence that would carry me into the next part. The part where people forgive in threads, and money sits where it is told to sit, and family stops using the word always like a lock. We did it right, I said out loud. We kept the kitchen a kitchen. My voice was steady. The room was kind. The day turned a corner and did not ask for applause. It asked for rest. I listened.
The week after the bank felt like a room putting itself back together after a long afternoon of moving furniture. The kettle still hummed, the window still open to fingers width, the rosemary leaned and stood. The new green folder sat in my binder under house with a little tab I wrote in my careful letters, Grace, custodial. Each time I passed the shelf and saw it, my shoulders loosened a degree. Mr. Green called on Monday morning because good officers do that when they know a family has been holding its breath. External wire received Friday, he said. Internal reversals settled. A custodial UTMA has been funded for near-term needs. The 529 is open for long-term. Both note, 2 signatures for withdrawals. He paused. You and I will sign together this first time for a small supply. Crib, car seat, bring a list, bring receipts. Bring your husband because he looks like a person who knows how to lift. I laughed, the kind that sounds like air going back into a room. He is, I said. We'll be there Wednesday. I set the phone down and wrote in my binder the way I have written, on time next to a mortgage for years. UTMA funded, 529 open, 2 signatures, Wednesday 3 p.m. I made a short shopping list because shopping is not my hobby. It is a way to tell the future it's welcome. Crib mattress, tiny socks, a second car seat for Aunt May's car, a shelf for books. I wrote lemon oil at the bottom because the dresser my mother used for me needed love, not replacement. I taped the list inside the pantry under a magnet that says joy, because that is what I wanted the whole thing to feel like. Work with a little joy in it. Nancy texted a photo of a receipt on Tuesday afternoon. Returned, auto center, she wrote. I stared at the scan for a second. There it was, the $1,350 from the ledger, back where it belonged. She added, copy to bank. More coming. It was the kind of sentence that makes a house exhale. I wrote, received receipts in my binder, and did not send a heart because some things do not need decoration. We sat with Aunt Etta on Wednesday morning after the market and told her we had signed the forms. She poured tea in her small kitchen with the window that sticks and said, write down what you did and put it in the box. People forget. Boxes, remember. She has a box for everything. I took a recipe card from her stack and wrote freeze, reverse, resign, appoint, fund, on the lines where ingredients should go. I smiled at the way language shifts when you put it in a kitchen. She slid the card into Grandma's old shoebox with the cream-colored envelope on top. Good, she said. Soup on Sunday is the same. Leo showed up that night with a folder under his arm and a grin so wide it looked like a child after a good report card. He brought the tree, he said, because he is that person in our house. We sat at the table with his binder and our green one. He pointed at names with his pen. We'll add this note under Ruth, he said. Took in Nancy in 1973, no legal adoption, loved like a daughter. He looked at me to see if the last part was okay. It was. Love belongs on a line even if paper did not see it. He added another note. Trust for first great-grandchild funded for Grace, 2024. He smiled at the way simple words could repair a small damage in a story. He ate soup and asked for seconds. Josh oiled the dresser from my mother with lemon oil while the baby slept. He took his time with the corners. He rubbed wax on the drawer runners the way Mark taught him a decade ago. The drawer glided, crisp and soft. He held up his hands and smiled. Watch, he said, and slid it closed. The sound made my chest answer. There, I said, better. He grinned like a man who gets to fix a thing without fixing a person. We went back to the bank with a small list and receipts. Mr. Green met us with that half smile that good people in institutions wear when they know that humans brought them an ordinary day they could help with. He said, "This is the part I like," and signed where a second signature was required. Car seat, mattress, shelf. A small check for diapers. He checked the boxes with his pen and slid a plain envelope across the desk like it was nothing but paper. It was exactly that, and also the sound of a promise being kept by people who had no idea they would have to keep it when they wrote it down. I took a photo of the car seat installed, not for the internet, for the file with "Installed Wednesday" written underneath. I took a photo of the crib made up with a simple sheet, not for likes, for my mother, who would have smiled at the way lemon oil makes old wood look new, without pretending it never had scratches. I texted the photos to Aunt Etta, Leo, and Mr. Green because kindness is also sending the kind of picture that makes a person who works in a bank remember why he learns to say freeze without making a fuss. Nancy sent a longer message after dinner. She wrote, "I told my son." We cried. "We're taking the baby to the park. The money will be fine. Leo is coming Saturday to help me find the receipts. The bank woman said I needed to bring them in a box and not in a shopping bag." She is not wrong. There was a photo attached of a cardboard box with receipts written on it in her careful letters. I smiled and did not write back "good girl," because she is not. She is my aunt, and she is 61, and she is learning how to be a person who hands a box to a person who asks for it.
My father's cousin recommended a probate attorney with kind eyes. We met her on Friday in an office that smelled like paper and lemon. She read the will and the trust with her soft hand on the page, like she was blessing it. "You did right," she said. "If there is trouble, call me. My fee is boring." We laughed. Boring is our favorite kind of money now. She wrote a letter to the file for the trust, representation for custodial trustee, and slid it across the table. We took it, and it made the binder feel a little heavier in a good way. There were hard moments. A call from a cousin who felt left out of our decision to put my name on the green folder. "You always get to be the keeper," she said. I breathed. "I am the daily keeper," I said. "The bank is the trust keeper. Leo is the tree keeper. You can be the photo keeper. We need them all." She laughed in that way a person does when they wanted you to be mean so they could be meaner, and you handed them a job instead. "Fine," she said. "I'll make copies." Nancy came by the following Thursday at noon, like a person learning a new habit. She stood on the mat. She did not step inside. She had a check in her hand. Not a cashier's check, a regular one, with her name, her bank, and too many swirls on the font. "For flowers," she said. "I have a receipt. They did not want to take it back." She held it out. I took it like a person taking a hot pan from someone who doesn't know how long to hold it. "Thank you," I said. "I'll bring it to Mr. Green." She nodded. "Please call me when you want me to bring soup," she said. "Soup I will not pay for with this." We both laughed because laughter is how we roll a heavy thing slowly down a hill and not crush our feet. On Sunday, we went to Aunt Etta's, and she made soup like a woman who measures with her copper ring, eye, palm, taste, and does not pretend she is doing math. Nancy sat across from me and did not avoid my eyes. She held Grace while I washed bowls. When she handed her back, she said, "I will always be your aunt. That is not paper." "And I will always be your niece. That is not paper either." We are learning to set one kind of truth down next to another and let them be neighbors. At the clinic library, Mrs. Patel, who knows everyone's business without being rude, leaned across the counter and said, "I heard you froze a bank with your voice," with a small smile. "We did," I said, "with paper and a kind man and a cousin who knows how to put people on trees." She nodded and slid a children's book toward me. "Under the Lemon Moon," she said. "You'll like it." I read it during my lunch and cried in the good way, because sometimes a simple story about a child with a lemon tree is exactly what a day needs. We set up automatic transfers to the 529 because I have learned that making good habits automatic is the way to keep myself from worrying at 3 a.m. when the baby is awake and the cat is knocking something off a shelf. 25 on Fridays, I wrote in my binder. 50 when possible. It is not a fortune. It is a hand on a back, pushing gently toward later. I wrote another short list inside the pantry because that is where I put the sentences I forget when life is loud. Call the bank if tired. Bring receipts. Ask Leo first. Don't let Nancy scare the bank. Thanks, Grandma. Soup on Wednesdays. Breathe. We had one more meeting at the bank to put 2 signatures into the system in the right way so that no teller had to argue with the person in a sweater who was good at arguing. Mr. Green printed a sheet with my name, his, and the words joint authority at the bottom. He handed it to me, and I slid it into the binder. He smiled. "We should keep a photo of that will in our lobby." He laughed. Language that saved a baby. I laughed, in a sentence from my grandmother. "Don't let Nancy scare the bank." He laughed too, the kind of laugh that makes a banker look like a man who was eaten soup by someone's aunt. Nancy started a list of her own, taped to her refrigerator under a magnet that says later, and a photo of her granddaughter. Queue up receipts, call accountant, bring box to Leo, send apology to Ruth's sister in Kansas. She sent me a photo, and I smiled, because lists are how we tell our brains not to panic and how we keep from turning each other into villains when we're just tired people who made choices out of order. Grace grew like babies do, quiet and fast. Her fingers opened and closed and then held a rattle with such seriousness you would think she was signing the bank papers herself. I whispered into her hair things she did not need to understand yet. We did the right thing. And your grand great loved you. And we will keep paper on our side. At night, when the house goes quiet, and the green folder sits on the shelf like any other and not like a mountain, I sit at the table and drink a cup of tea that I sometimes forget to drink when it's hot, and I think about how much of life is filing and showing up and not letting other people's voices decide how your day ends. I think about my grandmother writing a line on a cream-colored paper that held when everything fell for a minute. I think about my aunt writing checks back and calling me to say done, like a penitent learning the good rhythm of simple verbs. I think about my cousin with his tree and his polite emails to strangers with our last name. I think about my husband oiling a drawer. I think about the way the rosemary leans into the glass like it knows what sides are for and still tries to touch light.
I learned to forgive in threads, not because I am a saint, but because I like my kitchen to be a place where soup is cooked and not grudges. On some mornings, I have a stitch to add. On some, I do not. I keep the needle on the ledge. I stretch the thread across what needs it. I do not try to knit a blanket. I let time add rows. The day the last reversal posted, Mr. Green sent a one-line email because good bank people know that some families read their minds when they sit at a kitchen table with a binder. All funds returned, he wrote. Custodials intact. Files updated. It was a privilege. I wrote back, "Thank you," and then made lemon cake because the house asked for it. Aunt Etta came by. We ate it with tea. We did not clap. We said good and set our forks down with quiet hands. When I think about what saved us, it was small things in a row, a line on a whittle, a door that makes a crisp sound, a cousin who loves trees, a banker with a stamp, a grandmother who wrote, "Don't let Nancy scare the bank" on a card and stuck it in a dish where I could see it when I needed to. It was rain and rosemary and tea. It was a mother holding a baby while she read a ledger, and a ledger turning into a shelf with a lemon oil drawer that glides. We did not turn this into a story about thieves because we refused to be a show. We turned it into a story about a kitchen with a window open a finger's width and a woman who kept the paper on her side and the soup on the stove. We made room for the truth next to our cups and let it sit until it was done. We kept the house a house. Some mornings still begin with rain. It taps the kitchen window in that soft way, like someone who knows the house. The kettle hums. The rosemary leans toward the glass and stands back up, brave and green. I open the window a finger's width and let the good air in. The binder sits on the shelf under the small lamp. A new green folder tucked behind the house tab with a little label in my careful letters, Grace, Custodial. The cream-colored copy of Grandma's will lives beside it, the line I love underlined light with my eye for the first great-grandchild. A small card in the ring dish still says, Breathe. The door makes its crisp, clean sound. The room feels like itself. Life is quiet in the right ways again. We write on time next to the mortgage. We tape short lists inside the pantry. Diapers, lemon oil. Call the bank if tired. Soup on Wednesday. Mr. Green's one-line emails come like calm bells. Deposit posted. File updated. And I make tea for no reason other than that the day is here. Leo texts photos of the family tree with tidy notes that make me laugh and cry. Ruth took in Nancy. Custodial funded. Grace, 2024. He signs them tree kept, like a joke that turned out to be useful.
Nancy keeps bringing receipts in a box instead of a bag. She stands on the mat. She does not step in unless I say, after. She sent a photo of her granddaughter on a swing and wrote park without trying to attach it to a bank. On Sundays, Aunt Etta makes soup and says, no fuss, and we obey in the way that matters. Small words, simple steps, a window open a finger's width while we eat. When Nancy holds Grace now, she says, thank you first. You're welcome, I say. That is the whole prayer. Some things you keep because they help. I keep the DNA page tucked behind the will. Not to wave, to remember. I keep the card Grandma wrote, don't let Nancy scare the bank, in the ring dish, because it makes me laugh at myself when my shoulders climb and then they lower. I keep Mr. Green's business card on the fridge with a magnet that says, joy. Not because I call him often, but because knowing who to call is a way to sleep. Grace grows like babies do, quiet and fast. Her fingers open and close around the rattle like she is signing papers. We set up automatic transfers to the 529 for Fridays, small and steady. We don't need applause. We need habits. Each line in my binder feels like a hand on my back. UTMA, receipts filed. 529, contributed. 2 signatures, confirmed. It looks like paperwork. It is a promise kept to a woman who wrote a sentence on cream-colored paper and cooked 1,000 bowls of soup. There are still hard edges. A cousin who wanted the green folder to have her name. A woman at the market who says, "You froze a bank with your voice," like it's a rumor. I smile and say, paper and light, a kind officer, a cousin with a tree. I go home and open the window and stir the soup and think how many problems have been solved in this family by a kettle and a list. Forgiveness comes in threads. I add a stitch on mornings when Nancy texts, "Wire sent," or "Receipt returned." I leave the needle on the ledge on days when she posts a story that makes the family roll their eyes. No blankets, small rows. It holds. If you walked into my kitchen now, you'd see light on the table, the green folder's edge peeking from the binder, a lemon on the counter because lemon makes everything better, and the ring dish with the key and a card that says, "Breathe." You'd hear the soft click of the door, the kettle's low hum, the small sound of my daughter breathing, and maybe me saying, "We did it right," to no one and to everyone who helped. This is what I learned, and I keep it taped inside the pantry where I see it when I reach for mugs. Start with tea. Tell the truth in daylight. Bring paper. Use simple words. Freeze first, meet next. 2 signatures are a kindness. Ask for help. Let people stand near. Keep grandma's line in view. Soup on Wednesday. Breathe. It looks small written down. It is enough. It kept the kitchen a kitchen. It put money back where it belongs without turning people into stories they can't leave behind. It let a baby have her cushion and a family keep its soup night, and a woman who likes lists feel like she can sleep with the window open a finger's width again. On the first big rain of spring, I stood at the sink and watched drops stitch silver lines on the glass. I opened the window. The rosemary leaned in. Josh slid the drawer closed on the dresser he'd oiled, and the sound made my chest answer. Grace sighed and stretched like a comma, holding her own secret. I set my hand on the green folder and said thank you. To the room, to the rain, to the banker with the stamp, to the cousin with the tree, to the aunt with the box, to the woman I am now, who kept paper on her side and soup on the stove. No fuss.